Window at bedtime, I'd watch the tree and the faces it made at me. When the streetlight next to it was working, soft shafts of orange thrust out of its clutch of leaves as though in a slow explosion. If my parents weren't arguing, its shushing was the last thing I heard every day. Winter, it would become just another famished thing, along with the exposed bones of more demolished houses on our dwindling street. The rapping of night turned diggers into still monsters, cocking their heads for the slightest sound. These brittle days flogged the life from me. The tree was a dead thing, a totem which everything around tried to mirror. The ground turned black and white, save for the people it cradled and quietly sucked the life from. My friends, my family, we were all grey things dying with the town. Skies at the year's arse end were birdless and stained with the breath of the detergent factory. Any grass was bleached by exhaust fumes, any snow that might have prettified the place was streaked with filth. When we met by the tree, me, Rob and Dave, it was as if the lethargy of the wood had crept up through its roots into us. Our playtimes were morbid affairs. We dug in the soil for life and mashed or torched it. We threw stones at trains as they passed behind the hospital and pissed into empty crisp packets which we flung at pensioners by the bus stop. It's not autobiographical, by the way. On the days we made it into school, of which we only had another 6 months till we left, we behaved so badly we were forced to stand in the corridor. Often, we just buggered off home again. It became so cold, I had trouble sleeping. On nights like that, I would look out for my dad returning from the pub at the end of our street. The murmuring wireless downstairs told me what Mum was doing. Sometimes, with a lull in the music, I'd hear the clack of needles as she knitted something she never seemed to finish. More often than not, when Dad appeared, Mum would be in bed and he'd stroll down to the house with a woman linking him. The branches of the tree appeared to become more lively then, as though in welcome of something it knew. Sorry, this is something on me. A fantasy I like to entertain. Standing beneath the tree, they'd smoke and chat, and I'd sometimes see his face rippling beneath the tree's restless shadow. Their bodies might sag against each other, and his eyes would roll till I saw whites embedded in the orange of his skin, his teeth clenched like a yellow bar as her hand briskly rubbed a dark area between them. After a while, he'd kiss her goodbye, slipping into the house while I watched her lurch towards the main road, the tree's long black fingers falling upon her. I'd hear Dad getting into bed, Mum's laughter, and the tired song of their mattress for a few minutes, till silence returned and I lay clenched in my blankets thinking of Dad's eyes rolling deep into his head beneath the tree. Weekends, when he wasn't working, he spent at the allotments. Sometimes I went along to help. It was good to walk down there on my own. You could see the chimney, God's cigar, Rob called it, behind the hospital, and the great blue gasometers on the horizon of roofs. I liked to look at huge buildings. They reminded me of pictures I'd seen of cities, of places that were away from here. I heard the men in the allotments before I saw them, shouting and laughing, or if it was too chilly for that, the gritty noise of spades as they broke through soil. Approaching from the top of the hill, I'd see them hunched like black commas over cold, dull blades as they hacked at the earth, smoke rising from them like empty thought bubbles. The sight both cheered and demoralised me. The allotments were nestled in a valley on the town's edge, and winter frequently brought day-long mists which, like batting, tucked itself into the gaps between thin garden sheds. More men would loom out of the white like ill-sketched figures, or you could see pulses of orange as they tried to get warm with cigarettes or candles. I'd help him turn the ground or plant seeds, and he'd share his sandwich with me, let me have a swig from his bottle of brown ale. At times like those I felt a raw affinity with him, though I knew better than to assume the distance between us had been reduced. Had I asked him about the women, he'd have clocked me and sent me home. Later they'd have a fire at the centre of the allotment and pass around a flask. All those pale eyes staring into the flame plucked at something within me, and I watched their interest in this brief flicker of warmth and colour as an almost holy thing. For a while the mist was pushed back and the black creases of their faces softened, let through moments, or at least memories, of innocence. All their poison, the hatred and resentment and frustration building up inside them, was forgotten. The fire touched upon something ancient and pure, something unquestionably male. The community had brought them closer than any huddle could possibly imagine. It was all there, in the spark of fire in their eyes. For my part, it rescued me from thoughts of the tree, which I then realised I latched onto all the time. It was the bolt to which all my plans and actions were fastened. Still, I didn't perceive that as any great threat. Not then, anyway. Eventually, the frosts which trapped the rubble like fossils in amber melted, though the weather still contained enough of a pinch to bruise the skin blue. People died. Men and women I'd seen the previous week or month were gone. The coffins ferried through town worried me. I wanted to stop each one to check someone was inside, to reassure me that Mrs. Harris, Mr. Ollier and the rest of them hadn't just disappeared. Thoughts of hollowness, of shells haunted me. Every night for a week I watched the tree. In its sinuous tangle of arms I saw their faces. Sometimes I'd swear blind the tree was breathing. Its bark writhed as though it wanted to shed it like a coat. My dreams were filled with glistening flashes of what moved underneath, but, thank God, I forgot upon waking. The knowledge that a tree can look healthy while its inside spoiled and died from disease bothered me deeply. It was a symbol I could see everywhere. Mum died, not from the cold but because of it, killed by a rogue patch of ice by the market. This time I got to see someone lying in a silk-lined box, though it did nothing for my phobia. The cold seemed to have followed her to this final bed, whitening her cheeks. Though pallid, she looked perfect. Dad cuffed me when I kissed her waxen mouth. I cried even harder when he gathered me in his arms and whispered sorry. I saw less and less of Rob and Dave. Ironically, the absence of my mother proved more a check on my behaviour. Perhaps a more acute guilt was involved. Anyway, I stopped playing cruel games and took to drawing the tree. From a new angle, looking at it with my back to the demolished terrace, it seemed fatter, and its trunk was curved and knotted like a spine wrenched out of true. As much as I strived for a likeness, my tree didn't contain the faces I glimpsed in its bark or branches. Come spring and its leaves, there would be even more. The thought I'd be leaving Mum behind as we crossed the threshold of the coming new year filled me with a profound despair that lasted for weeks. Christmas was an empty time. I was growing to see it as a tawdry bit of glitz meant to relieve winter of its dour persistence, but which was unable to pierce the cynical shell I was retreating into. Towards the middle of February, Dad brought Helen into the house for the first time. He was spending every day in the pub, having lost his job on the 12th night. I didn't mind her being there, but Dad felt he had to go overboard to make sure it was okay by me. As if that mattered. I started picking through the rubble. Here and there, shoots were pushing through the chaos of brick and plaster, cheering me. Of all the seasons, Mum liked spring best. It was easy to picture her smile. It was good to see her close in the sprouting of these bits of green. On the night before the first warm sun of the year, a squall tore across the town as though angry that winter was over, or in preparation for milder days. For an instant, when I heard the laughter, the rhythm of their bed. I thought she was back, that winter had been a hoax played by my mind. The tree was a glossy piece of tar teased into a shock of lines. Its branches whipped and struggled with the wind as if it were a tangible stuff. Slates lifted from roofs and smashed silently on the ground. In the uppermost reaches of the tree, level with my window, I saw Mum's face. I thought it was a reflection in the glass, but when I turned around, only the tussle between light and shadow on the wall greeted me. "You'll come visit me soon, love." "Yes, Mum," I said, natural as you like, looking back into the black core of the tree where darkness nested. Gradually the storm passed on, unlike my fear, which thickened as I brooded upon what I'd heard. In the morning, leaves peeped from the swollen joints of the tree, and the memory of Mum's voice was more a comfort than cause for panic. Coming back from the allotments one afternoon that week, the weather brightening every day, at one point I was able to dispense with my sweater as I travelled a shallow trench. I felt a compulsion to alter my route. By the time I reached the cemetery, that need had dissolved into a warm band of rightness, of expediency. Rather than feeling honour bound to be near her, a gentler, more natural yearning had taken me, for which I was glad. Immaculate as it was, I fussed her grave, briefly disturbed when I imagined that raised mound as a thick blanket stifling her. Of course I was tense for her voice, which didn't come, and I don't know whether I was grateful or disappointed. Maybe Dad noticed how subdued I'd become that evening, because he slapped a little aftershave on my furrowing cheeks and took me down to the pub with him. It was a still night. The houses seemed coiled in expectation of some kind of event. Though the calm was a pleasant change, it only made my nervousness more noticeable. I was grateful Dad didn't chide me about it. The pub was a mass of yellowed windows. My shadow cowered as Dad pushed open the door and people roared his name. We entered a fog of smoke and sweat. Women I didn't know ruffled my hair and winked at Dad while he bought drinks. Anonymous hands patted my backside. When Dad returned, pushing a big glass of foam into my chest, his forehead bore a brown lipstick smear. In the second before recognising it as such, I looked like it had opened a third eye. I wondered what my dad's true constitution was like. It seemed as though I'd only ever seen him as this fleeting harlequin figure in guises of drunkenness and deceit. Beneath the cologne and bravado, he was as much a stranger to me as the other faces in this bar. In that clenched knot of people, I felt a moment of abject panic. The one genuine person I knew was gone, and I couldn't associate my own identity with anything more solid than the tree outside my window. In a slow, swooping vision, I saw myself 10 years on, resigned to the crude safety of parochial life and playing a rake's role within the beery cocoon of this pub. Predictably, my pessimism faded as the bitter took hold and I was swept into the bawdy camaraderie of it all. Comments that I was the spit of my dad made me feel proud, not threatened. A haze fell when everybody's faces melted into gently shaded rumours and I couldn't distinguish between one person and another. I slurred my goodnights and barged my way outside, vaguely registering a volley of protests at my departure. The soapy air dilated the disharmony in my head so that the lights became great glassy shards I couldn't see beyond. "It's this way, lover," came the voice at my ear, and what I'd assumed to be the bloated sensation in my guts proved to be the arms of a girl encircling me from behind. She frog-marched me home. I could just make out the tree, jarred with each footstep into a dim beast, arms outstretched to greet me, its many faces lost in the blaze of orange flame. I began to flay my arms when she manoeuvred me into its shadow, as though I was a sacrifice, but she spun me around just as I saw its brackish maw become discernible in the pattern of bark. Pressed up against me, her mouth trying to draw some kind of orderly movement from my own. I felt the runnels at my back squirm as though, like some slowly feeding thing, it was trying to subsume me. Trapped, I rolled my eyes in desperation, struggling to voice my distress, and, seeing my vacant window, understanding what I was becoming, struck out against the girl who was working her leg between mine. Off balance, she fell on her backside. I couldn't decode the babble of filth she spat at me. My mind wasn't working that quickly. As she hobbled away, I let myself into the house, imagining the tree straining against its concrete base to recapture my warmth, to suck me into itself. I slept shallowly, dreaming of the seas. I imagined pink, smiling faces collapsing from corruption, eating people inside out. When I woke up, my head thudding, I was afraid to move lest parts of me caved in. I lay still for hours that day, smelling the grimy sky drift through our house, listening to the hushing outside. These things I remember well. And here I stand again, on the street I finally managed to escape so long ago. The pub's still standing, though it doesn't look as busy as it once was. All the houses are new. Our terrace must have been knocked down shortly after I left. Dad's well, and still living in the area. I'll visit him in a while. The tree. I can see the tree. I'm brave enough to touch it. Momentarily it feels as spongy as skin, but that's just moss on the bark. Hug a tree, my old English teacher used to say. They're extraordinary things, beautiful things. Show you appreciate them. It's with some surprise that I realise I never climbed the tree or tied a rope to its branches and swung like a monkey. Why was that? I'm asking, though I know full well. With my penknife I carved the first letter of Mum's name, but it's too much like cutting myself. I have to turn away to go now before I see the sap. I'm not sure it will be the colour I expect. God, the way you whisper to me as I hurry down the street. And were I to take one last look back at the faces shifting in your branches, might I see my own somewhere? Thank you very much.